Before Daniel could respond, the lights went out, plunging the room into darkness. A loud bang came from upstairs, followed by the baby's sharp cry. Mary's voice outside, shaking the windows of the large family house. Daniel paced the living room, his footsteps echoing off the walls. His sister, Linda, sat stiffly on the couch, her arms crossed tightly. The air between them was thick with tension, heavier than the dark clouds gathering outside. "You've always been selfish, Daniel," Linda spat, her voice trembling. "Everything is about you. Even now, after Dad's gone, you still want it all." Daniel stopped pacing and turned to her, his face a mask of frustration. "This isn't about greed, Linda. I worked for that land with Dad while you were off in the city, living your fancy life." Linda shot up from the couch, her eyes blazing. "Fancy life? You think struggling to make ends meet in Lagos was a luxury? I sent money home when you couldn't even afford to buy fertilizer for that farm." Their argument was interrupted by the creak of the old wooden staircase. Daniel's wife, Mary, appeared at the top of the stairs, holding their baby. Her soft voice cut through the tension. "Can't you two calm down? Fighting won't solve anything." But neither of them listened. The argument escalated, their voices rising over the roar of thunder outside. The inheritance left by their father, a sprawling piece of farmland and the family house, had become a battlefield. The lawyer's visit earlier that day had been the spark. Their father's will, handwritten on a piece of paper, had given Daniel the farmland and left Linda the house. But Linda wasn't satisfied. She believed their father had been manipulated before his death. "What about the jewelry, Daniel? The ones Mum left before she died? You hid them, didn't you?" Linda accused, her voice cracking. Daniel froze. His silence was answer enough. "You stole from me," Linda whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." Before Daniel could respond, the lights went out, plunging the room into darkness. A loud bang came from upstairs, followed by the baby's sharp cry. Mary's voice called out in alarm, but the storm drowned her words. Linda reached for her phone to turn on the flashlight, but it slipped from her trembling fingers. She heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming down the stairs. "Mary!" Daniel called out, his voice strained. But it wasn't Mary. The figure descending the stairs was unfamiliar, cloaked in shadows. In the faint light of Linda's phone, they could make out a man's face, one neither of them recognized. He held an old envelope in his hand, water dripping from his coat onto the wooden floor. "I have a message from your father," the man said, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The envelope in his hand was marked with their father's handwriting. Daniel stepped back, his heart pounding. Linda's trembling fingers fumbled to pick up her phone. The stranger placed the envelope on the coffee table, his movements deliberate, almost rehearsed. "How did you get this?" Daniel demanded, his voice tight with suspicion. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the room, his eyes settling on the portraits of their parents hanging on the wall. His presence felt invasive, like he carried the weight of something too heavy for words. "Your father gave this to me a week before his death," the man finally said. His tone was calm, almost unnervingly so. "He told me to deliver it when the time was right. Tonight felt appropriate." Linda stepped forward, her anger momentarily replaced by confusion. "What do you mean, when the time was right? Who are you?" The man smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say I was a friend of your father's. Now, if you'll excuse me, my job here is done." Before they could ask more, the man turned and walked out, disappearing into the storm. Daniel moved to the window, but the rain obscured any chance of seeing where the stranger had gone. "Open it," Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel hesitated. The envelope seemed to pulsate in his hands, as if it carried secrets too dangerous to uncover. But Linda grabbed it from him, tearing it open with trembling hands. Inside was a single piece of paper, written in their father's unmistakable handwriting. "To my children. If you are reading this, it means I have passed on, and the storm between you has begun. What I leave you now is not wealth, but a truth that will change everything. Your inheritance is more than land or a house, it is a legacy bound in blood. You must find the black box buried under the old mango tree before the truth consumes you both. Linda's face went pale. What is this? A game? Is he serious? Daniel's mind raced. The old mango tree had stood in their backyard for decades, its roots stretching deep into the earth. Their father had always been protective of it, forbidding them from digging near it when they were children. Without a word, Daniel grabbed a flashlight and headed for the back door. Wait, Linda called, following him. We're not doing this in the middle of a storm. Do you want to wait and find out what's in that box after someone else does? Daniel shot back, his voice sharp. Reluctantly, Linda followed. The rain drenched them instantly as they stepped outside. The tree loomed in the distance, its branches swaying ominously in the wind. As Daniel began digging, the muddy ground fought against him, making every movement harder. Linda stood behind him, clutching the flashlight, her eyes darting nervously at every sound around them. Faster, she urged. Minutes felt like hours until Daniel's spade hit something solid. They both froze. Slowly, he uncovered a small, rusted box. It was locked, and the key was nowhere in sight. Break it open, Linda said, her voice tight with anticipation. Daniel hesitated, but then, using the edge of the spade, he pried the lid open. Inside was a stack of yellowed papers, a small photograph, and a sealed envelope marked only for Linda. What's this? Linda asked, reaching for the envelope. But before she could open it, Daniel grabbed it. Not so fast. This affects both of us. Let go, Daniel. Linda snapped, tugging at the envelope. Their struggle was interrupted by the sound of movement behind them. They both turned, their breaths caught in their throats. Standing at the edge of the yard, just beyond the reach of the flashlight, was the same man who had delivered the letter. You're not alone, he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. And then, he disappeared into the shadows. The air seemed to freeze around them as Daniel and Linda stared into the darkness where the man had stood. The storm's fury faded into the background, replaced by a suffocating silence. What did he mean by that? Linda whispered, clutching the flashlight tightly. I don't know, Daniel replied, his voice strained. But I don't trust him, or this. He held up the envelope marked with Linda's name, his knuckles white. Linda snatched it from his hand, her desperation outweighing her caution. Without hesitation, she ripped it open, revealing a handwritten letter. Her eyes darted over the words, her face contorting with confusion and then shock. What does it say? Daniel demanded, stepping closer. Linda's voice trembled as she read aloud. Linda, my child, you are the key to everything. What lies in the truth about our family? A truth that has been hidden for decades. I am sorry for the burden it will place on you, but you deserve to know. The photograph will explain more. Linda's hands shook as she reached for the small, faded photograph. It showed two children, a boy and a girl, standing in front of a house that neither she nor Daniel recognized. The boy looked eerily like Daniel, but the girl was a stranger, until Linda noticed something familiar about her face. This can't be, Linda stammered. What is it? Daniel asked, his voice rising. Linda turned the photo toward him. That's not me. But look at her, Daniel. She has Dad's eyes. Who is she? Daniel stared at the photo, his mind racing. The resemblance was undeniable. He reached into the box and pulled out the stack of papers. The top one was a birth certificate, dated years before Linda was born. The name on it sent a chill down his spine. Margaret Johnson. Who's Margaret? Daniel asked, more to himself than to Linda. I don't know. Linda cried, her voice cracking. Why would Dad hide something like this? And why does this girl look like me? Before they could process the discovery, a loud bang echoed from inside the house. They both turned toward the sound, their nerves frayed. Someone's in there, Daniel said, gripping the spade tightly as if it were a weapon. We should call the police, Linda whispered, her voice barely audible. There's no time, Daniel replied. Stay behind me. They made their way back to the house, their steps slow and cautious. The front door creaked open as they approached, though neither of them had left it ajar. Inside, the living room was eerily quiet, the envelope from earlier still lying on the... Then they heard it, a faint creaking sound coming from the second floor. "It's coming from Dad's old room," Linda whispered, her heart pounding. Daniel nodded, motioning for her to stay close. They ascended the stairs, the floorboards groaning under their weight. The door to their father's room was slightly open, the faint glow of a lantern spilling into the hallway. Daniel pushed the door open, his breath hitching. The room was empty, but the lantern sat on the dresser, casting flickering shadows. On the bed lay another surface damp from the storm. "What is this?" Linda asked, her voice shaking. Daniel picked it up and opened it, his hands trembling. The note inside was short and chilling. "The truth is closer than you think." As they stood there, trying to make sense of it all, the bedroom door slammed shut behind them, plunging the room into darkness. Linda screamed, and Daniel dropped the envelope, fumbling for his phone. "Who's there?" Daniel shouted into the void. Low, deliberate footsteps filled the hallway outside. Then came the voice, the same deep, unsettling voice of the man who had delivered. "You were never box." Stopped just. Linda clutched, her breathing rapid. The light cast eerie shadows, making the room feel smaller, more suffocating. Daniel stepped forward, raising the spade defensively. "What do you want from us?" Silence hung heavy in the air for a moment before the voice replied, calm and menacing. "It's not about what I want. It's about what you've awakened." Linda's knees nearly buckled. "Awakened? What are you talking about?" Before the voice could answer, the door creaked open slowly, as if pushed by an invisible force. The hallway was empty, but the faint sound of whispers drifted toward them, echoing like a warning. "This is insane," Linda whispered, pulling at Daniel's arm. "We need to get out of here." But Daniel shook his head, his eyes locked on the shadows dancing in the hallway. "No. Whatever this is, it's tied to that box. We can't run now." Linda's frustration boiled over. "Are you hearing yourself? Dad's secrets are tearing us apart, and now we're dealing with some ghost or intruder." As if responding to her outburst, the whispers grew louder, filling the room with a chilling energy. Papers from the box scattered across the floor as an invisible force seemed to whip through the air. The photograph of Margaret fluttered onto the dresser, its presence a haunting reminder of the unanswered questions. Then, abruptly, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. Daniel bent down, gathering the scattered papers. "There has to be something here that explains all this." Linda picked up the photograph, staring at it again. "Why does she look like me, Daniel? Who is Margaret?" Daniel scanned one of the papers, his face paling. "This can't be right." He handed the document to Linda, his hands trembling. It was another birth certificate, this time with his own name on it. "What's wrong with this?" Linda asked, squinting at the faded print. Then she saw it. The father's name was correct, but the mother's name wasn't their mother. "It says, Margaret Johnson," Linda whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel's eyes darted back to the photograph. "She wasn't our sister, Linda. She was my mother." The revelation hit them like a tidal wave. Linda staggered back, clutching the dresser for support. "That doesn't make sense. Dad never mentioned another wife, or another family." Before Daniel could respond, the lantern flickered violently, and the whispers returned, louder and more chaotic. A shadow moved in the corner of the room, growing and taking form. The man's voice echoed again, but this time it sounded as though it came from everywhere and nowhere. "You've uncovered the truth, but you're not ready for what it means." The shadow lunged toward them, and the room was plunged into total darkness. Linda screamed, and Daniel swung the spade blindly, hitting nothing but air. Then, as suddenly as it began, the chaos stopped. The lantern's light returned, steady but dim. The room was empty except for them, but the door was now wide open. On the bed, a new note had appeared, scrawled in jagged handwriting. "The land holds more secrets than the house. You must decide, face them together, or be destroyed apart." Daniel and Linda stared at the note, their breaths ragged. They knew they had no choice but to follow the trail their father had left, even if it led to answers they weren't prepared for. "Whatever this is, we face it together," Daniel said, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. Linda nodded, clutching the photograph tightly. Together. But as they left the room, neither noticed the shadow lingering in the corner, its form shifting and watching. Linda and Daniel descended the stairs cautiously, their footsteps lovingly silent. Storm outside had quieted, but the air inside felt thick and suffocating, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Daniel held the spade tightly, scanning every shadow. The note said the land holds secrets. What do you think it means? Linda clutched the photograph, her eyes darting nervously. Maybe there's something buried here. Something connected to Margaret. Daniel frowned. Why would Dad hide something so important? And why didn't Mom ever mention her? Linda's grip on the photograph tightened. Maybe she didn't know. Or maybe she did, and that's why he never told us. They reached the living room, where the envelope from earlier still lay on the coffee table. Linda picked it up, hoping to find some overlooked clue, but it was empty. The man's cryptic appearance and disappearance haunted her thoughts. We need to go back outside, Daniel said, heading for the back door. The mango tree wasn't the only place Dad was protective of. Remember the shed by the garden? He always kept it locked. Linda hesitated. The shed had always been a forbidden zone, shrouded in mystery. They'd once tried to sneak inside as kids, only to be scolded harshly by their father. Are you sure? Linda asked, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded. If the answers aren't there, we'll go to the police. But I can't walk away without knowing. Reluctantly, Linda followed him into the yard. The rain had turned the soil into a muddy mess, and the air smelled of wet earth. The shed stood at the edge of the garden, its wooden frame weathered but still sturdy. Daniel approached the door, testing the handle. It was locked, as always. He raised the spade and struck the padlock hard. The first hit only dented it, but the second sent it flying to the ground. The door creaked open, revealing a cluttered interior filled with tools, old boxes, and a faint metallic smell. Daniel shone his flashlight around, the beam cutting through the darkness. Help me look, he said, stepping inside. Linda followed reluctantly, her eyes scanning the shelves and floor. Most of the items seemed ordinary, rusty tools, gardening supplies, and old furniture. But then Daniel's flashlight stopped on a large, dust-covered chest in the corner. What's that? Linda asked, her heart pounding. Daniel knelt and brushed away the dust, revealing an old, heavy chest with intricate carvings on its surface. The designs looked familiar, like the patterns on the family's ancestral cloth their father used to treasure. He tried to lift the lid, but it wouldn't budge. It's locked. Linda's eyes darted to a nearby shelf. There's a key here. She grabbed the rusted key and handed it to Daniel, who inserted it into the chest's lock. With a loud click, the lid creaked open. Inside were stacks of old documents, photographs, and a leather-bound journal. The photographs showed their father with a woman who looked strikingly like Linda, but it wasn't their mother. Margaret. Is this her? Linda asked, picking up one of the photographs. Daniel opened the journal, flipping through pages filled with their father's neat handwriting. He stopped at an entry dated years before Linda was born. I fear my children will one day uncover the truth, and I won't be there to explain. Margaret was my first love, and Daniel is her son. But the secrets of our family run deeper than blood. The land is cursed, an inheritance of pain passed down through generations. I tried to shield them, but I failed. The past will find them, as it has found me. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. What is he talking about? Cursed. Before Linda could respond, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The door to the shed slammed shut behind them, plunging them into darkness. Daniel! Linda screamed, clutching his arm. The whispers grew into a deafening roar, and the shadows in the shed began to move, twisting and writhing. The lantern flickered violently, casting monstrous shapes on the walls. Get out, a voice boomed, shaking the shed. Daniel grabbed Linda's hand, yanking her toward the door. It wouldn't budge. The shadows closed in, their forms becoming clearer, faces distorted with anger and sorrow. Who are you? Daniel shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. The voices spoke in unison, chilling and otherworldly. We are the truth your father buried. And now, so shall you. The chest snapped shut on its own, and the lantern's light extinguished, leaving them in total darkness. Linda's scream pierced the darkness as she clung to Daniel, her nails digging into his arm. The whispers seemed to swirl around them, growing louder and more chaotic. The shed felt like it was closing in, the air thick and suffocating. "Stay close to me," Daniel shouted, his voice barely cutting through the cacophony. He fumbled with the spade, swinging it wildly into the void. It struck something solid, and a sharp, unearthly wail erupted, echoing in the confined space. The shadows recoiled for a moment, giving them a fleeting chance. "The window!" Linda cried, pointing to the small, cracked pane near the ceiling. Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed an old tool from a nearby shelf and smashed the glass. Rain poured in, cold and relentless, but the opening was large enough to climb through. "Go first," Daniel urged, boosting Linda toward the window. She hesitated, looking back at him. "What about you?" "I'm right behind you. Just go." Linda scrambled through the window, cutting her hand on the jagged glass but ignoring the pain. As she tumbled onto the muddy ground outside, she turned to see Daniel pulling himself through. The whispers inside the shed grew into a deafening roar, and the entire structure shuddered as though it might collapse. Just as Daniel cleared the window, the shed door burst open, and a torrent of shadowy forms spilled out, swirling like a storm. "Run!" Daniel shouted, grabbing Linda's hand. They sprinted through the rain-soaked garden, slipping and stumbling in the mud. The shadows pursued them, their shapes shifting and morphing into grotesque figures with hollow eyes and mouths frozen in silent screams. The house loomed ahead, but Daniel suddenly pulled Linda toward the mango tree instead. "What are you doing?" Linda shouted, struggling to keep up. "It's the only place Dad ever seemed afraid of." Daniel replied, "Maybe there's something here that can stop this." The tree's gnarled roots stretched out like skeletal hands, half buried in the wet earth. At its base was a hollow, just large enough for a small box. Daniel dropped to his knees and began digging frantically with his hands. Linda joined him, her fingers clawing at the mud despite the rain washing it back into the hole. Finally, their hands struck something solid, a small, rusted metal box. Daniel yanked it free and pried it open with the spade. Inside was a single sheet of paper, its edges yellowed with age, and a strange, carved stone. Linda grabbed the paper, her eyes scanning the faint handwriting. "It's a warning," she said, her voice shaking. "It says the land is bound by an old curse, tied to the family's bloodline. The only way to stop it is to break the stone." Daniel held up the stone, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to writhe under the rain. "This." Before Linda could answer, the shadows closed in around them, forming a tight circle. The figure's hollow eyes glowed faintly, and the air became icy cold. A voice boomed, louder than ever before. "The stone binds us. Destroy it, and you destroy yourselves." Linda looked at Daniel, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do?" Daniel hesitated, the stone feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. He looked at Linda, then at the shadows, and back at the stone. "If this is what Dad wanted us to find," he said, his voice steady despite the terror in his eyes, "then we have to trust him." With a yell, he raised the stone high above his head and brought it down onto the spade, shattering it into pieces. The shadows let out an ear-piercing scream, their forms writhing and dissolving into the rain. The oppressive darkness lifted, and the air became still. For a moment, everything was silent except for the rain and their ragged breathing. Linda collapsed onto the ground, tears streaming down her face. "Is it over?" she whispered. Daniel stared at the shattered pieces of the stone, unsure of what to say. The shadows were gone, but the weight of what they had uncovered remained. Then, from deep within the earth beneath the tree, a low rumble began to grow. The rumble beneath the tree sent tremors through the ground, shaking Linda and Daniel to their cores. Mud churned and roots shifted, as though the land itself was coming alive. "What's happening?" Linda cried, scrambling to her feet. Daniel pulled her back, away from the tree. "I don't know. But we can't stay here." The hollow at the base of the tree widened, revealing a deep, gaping pit. A foul odor wafted from the opening, like a mix of decayed earth and something far worse. The air grew heavy again, but this time it wasn't the oppressive darkness of the shadows, It was something ancient, something alive. A voice, faint but clear, rose from the pit. It was not the angry roar of the shadows but a calm, measured tone that made their skin crawl. You have broken the bond, but the debt remains unpaid. Linda froze, her heart pounding. Debt? What debt? Daniel stepped forward, his fists clenched. We've done what was needed. We destroyed the stone and ended the curse. The voice chuckled, deep and haunting. Fools. The stone was merely a seal. Breaking it freed the spirits, but now the land must choose its price. Linda's legs felt like jelly as she clung to Daniel's arm. What does that mean? What price? The pit rumbled, and a gust of wind burst forth, carrying with it ghostly whispers that swirled around them. Images appeared in the air, Margaret holding a baby, their father burying something beneath the tree, and blood-red symbols carved into the bark. It was never about the inheritance, the voice continued. It was about the choices your father made and the lies he built your lives upon. One of you must stay and pay for his sins. Daniel's jaw tightened. Stay? What do you mean? The voice grew louder, more insistent. The land demands a guardian. A life to balance the scales. Choose, or I will choose for you. Linda's head spun as panic set in. This is insane. We didn't ask for this. We didn't do anything wrong. The ground shook violently, and the wind howled, nearly knocking them off their feet. The pit seemed to grow larger, its edges crumbling into darkness. Daniel grabbed Linda's shoulders, forcing her to look at him. We have to decide. If we don't, neither of us might make it out of here. Linda's tears mixed with the rain as she shook her head. No, Daniel. We can't do this. There has to be another way. Daniel looked at the pit, then back at Linda. His face was pale, but his eyes were resolute. Linda, you have a life to live. I can't let you throw it away. If someone has to stay, it's me. Linda's heart shattered at his words. No, you can't do this. We're in this together. But Daniel was already stepping toward the pit, his movements slow and deliberate. The whispers grew louder, as if the spirits were calling to him. No! Linda screamed, grabbing his arm and pulling him back with all her strength. The pit's rumbling intensified, and the voice roared, time is running out. Choose. Linda stared into Daniel's eyes, her mind racing. She couldn't let him sacrifice himself, but she couldn't bear to face the consequences of staying either. Suddenly, the whispers changed, becoming softer, almost pleading. Linda felt a strange warmth in her chest, and a voice, different from the one before, whispered directly to her. The truth will set you free, but only if you face it together. Linda looked at Daniel, her resolve hardening. No one is staying. If this is about Dad's sins, we'll face them, together. Daniel hesitated, confusion and fear flashing across his face. But, no, Linda said firmly. I won't lose you, Daniel. We're stronger together, and that's what this land needs to see. She turned toward the pit, her voice shaking but determined. We won't let you take one of us. If there's a debt, we'll both pay it. The rumbling stopped abruptly, and the pit seemed to shrink slightly. The voice was silent for a moment before it returned, softer and almost curious. Together, you defy the curse. The wind died down, and the whispers faded. The pit began to close, the earth knitting itself back together as if the land was finally at peace. Linda and Daniel stood in stunned silence, clutching each other as the night grew still. The rain eased, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted. But even as the ground settled and the pit disappeared, they knew the mystery of their father's secrets was far from over. The night had fallen eerily quiet, the storm subsiding to a gentle drizzle. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, but the silence was unsettling. Linda and Daniel stood together beneath the now calm mango tree, still clutching each other, trying to process what had just happened. Did we win? Linda whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel shook his head slowly. I don't know, but it feels like we've only scratched the surface. Linda glanced at the spot where the pit had once been, now just a hollow in the ground, but the feeling of something lurking beneath still lingered. The land had quieted, but she could still sense the heavy presence of their father's secrets. What did the voice mean by together? She asked, her brow furrowed. What truth are we supposed to face? Daniel stared into the distance, lost in thought. It's about Dad. All of this, the curse, the land, the inheritance, it's all tied to what he did. To what he hid. Linda's heart sank. But we've already uncovered so much. What else could there be? We don't know, Daniel replied, shaking his head. We need to go back. We need to find out what he really did. All this time, we've been fighting for what we thought was ours, but maybe, his voice trailed off as he turned to look at the house in the distance. Linda followed his gaze, the familiar sight of the old family house now seeming more like a prison than a home. The secrets buried there had almost consumed them, and they both knew they weren't done yet. I can't go back there, Linda said softly, her chest tight. Not until we know everything. Not until we know what we're really facing. Daniel nodded, his expression grim. I understand. But we can't run from it. We need to know what happened. We need to know what Dad was hiding. There was a long pause as they both stood in the shadow of the mango tree, the weight of their father's sins hanging heavy in the air. The land had demanded a price, but Linda and Daniel knew the true cost was more than just the inheritance or the curse. It was about the lies that had bound their family for generations. The wind picked up again, and the air felt colder, as though a new chapter was beginning. We need to go through his things, Linda said, determination creeping into her voice. There's no way around it. We need to see everything. Daniel nodded. We'll start in the study. Dad's journals were there. He kept everything. Maybe we'll find the truth. As they turned to leave the garden, heading back toward the house, a faint voice seemed to call to them from the shadows of the tree. Remember, it said, soft and haunting. The truth will never set you free, unless you are willing to sacrifice everything. The chill in the air deepened, and the ground beneath their feet felt heavier. Linda's heart raced as she looked around, but there was nothing in sight, just the dim glow of the house in the distance. I don't like the sound of that, she muttered, clutching Daniel's arm tighter. Daniel's face had turned pale, but he didn't say anything. He knew that whatever lay ahead, they had no choice but to face it. There was no running from the past, no escaping the truth that had been buried beneath their feet. They walked in silence, the shadows growing longer with every step. As they reached the front door of the house, Linda hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. This is it, she whispered. Whatever we find in there, we can't undo it. Are you ready for this? Daniel looked at her, his expression unwavering despite the fear in his eyes. We have no choice. Let's go. They stepped inside, the familiar scent of old wood and dust filling the air. The house felt different now, as though it were holding its breath. They made their way to the study, the room where their father had spent countless hours, locked away from the world. The door creaked open, and they stepped inside. It was exactly as they remembered, cluttered with papers, books, and old furniture. But this time, there was something unsettling about it, as if it had been waiting for them. Daniel moved toward the desk, where their father's journals were kept. The leather covers looked worn, the pages yellowed with age. He pulled one out, opening it to the first page. As he began to read, Linda watched him closely. Her heart raced, knowing that whatever they discovered next would change everything. Daniel's face grew more and more tense as he read, his eyes scanning the pages with increasing urgency. Linda, he whispered, his voice barely audible, you need to see this. Linda walked over, peering at the journal over his shoulder. On the page was a single sentence, written in their father's hand. The land must claim a soul before the curse is lifted. Linda's breath caught in her throat. A soul? What does that mean? But Daniel didn't answer. He turned the page, and there, written in blood-red ink, was a name. Margaret. Linda's blood ran cold as the truth began to unfurl before them, the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle falling into place. Linda's eyes widened as she stared at the name written in the blood-red ink. Margaret. Her heart raced, and a cold sweat prickled at her skin. The name echoed in her mind, as if it held the key to all their questions, to all the mysteries they had been chasing. Margaret. Linda whispered, her voice shaky. But, that's... Margaret is Mom's sister, Daniel finished for her, his voice a mix of disbelief and fear. But what does she have to do with this? She's been dead for years. Linda felt a sharp pain in her chest. Her Aunt Margaret had been like a second mother to them after their parents had passed. She had always been kind, always there for them. But now, the name on the page felt like a betrayal. "What do you mean, a soul?" she asked, her voice rising in panic. Why would Dad write something like that? What was he hiding? Daniel turned the page slowly, his fingers trembling. The next sentence seemed to burn into the paper, as if it were alive. "The price must be paid. The bloodline must be severed to lift the curse. A sacrifice is necessary, and Margaret must be the one to pay." Linda stepped back, her knees weak. No, this can't be true. Why would he write this? Daniel's face was ashen, the words on the pages sinking into his mind like poison. He shook his head slowly. "This doesn't make sense. Our father, he wasn't like this. He wasn't a murderer. But if he wrote this," Linda began, trailing off as her mind raced. "Could he have been planning to sacrifice Margaret to save us? Or to end the curse?" Daniel stared at the journal, his mind trying to process the chaos swirling inside him. But Margaret is gone. How could he make this decision for her? The room felt suffocating now, the air thick with the weight of their father's secret. The walls seemed to close in around them as Linda glanced, seeking something, anything, that could explain this madness. Then, on the desk beside, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small wooden box, its surface intricately carved with symbols she didn't recognize. It sat beside a stack of old letters, almost as if it had been waiting for them. Linda reached out, her fingers trembling as she opened the box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was an old, tarnished key. "What's this?" she murmured, picking it up and turning it over in her hands. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the key. "I don't know, but it looks like it's meant for something specific." Linda examined it more closely. The key was old, its metal worn with age, but it felt heavy in her hand, as if it held more than just the promise of unlocking a door. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through the room, making the papers on the desk flutter. Linda and Daniel both turned, startled. But no one was there. The house was silent, except for the creaking of the floorboards beneath their feet. "I think we need to find out where this key fits," Linda said, her voice low and determined. Daniel nodded, though his expression was uncertain. "But where do we even begin looking?" Linda's gaze swept across the room. The study had always been their father's domain, filled with his books, journals, and papers. But now it felt like a place of dark secrets, a tomb of forgotten sins. She looked to the far wall, where a large, ornate mirror hung, reflecting their faces in the dim light. "That mirror," she said suddenly. "It's been there for as long as I can remember. It's always been the centerpiece of the room. There's something hidden behind it." Daniel frowned. "You think Dad might have hidden something there?" Linda shrugged, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know, but it's worth checking." Together, they moved toward the mirror, their steps heavy and slow. As they got closer, Linda's breath caught in her throat. The mirror, though beautiful, now seemed to hum with an eerie energy. They stood in front of it for a moment, unsure of what to do. Finally, Linda placed the key in her pocket and reached for the frame, gently tugging it to see if it would move. The mirror didn't budge at first, but with a soft creak, the frame shifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment behind it. Linda's pulse quickened as she pulled the mirror away from the wall, exposing the dark, narrow space beyond. Inside, there was a small chest, locked, but with a keyhole that seemed to match the key in Linda's hand. She gasped. "It's here. This is it." Daniel stepped back, his eyes wide. "I can't believe it. Do you think this is where Dad hid everything?" Linda nodded, her hands shaking as she inserted the key into the lock. With a click, the chest opened, and they both peered inside. The chest contained a bundle of old letters tied with a ribbon, a faded photograph of a woman Linda didn't recognize, and a dark, leather-bound book. Linda carefully picked up the book. It was thick, with strange symbols etched into the cover. As she opened it, the pages were filled with more writing, but it wasn't in any language she knew. The text was strange, almost hypnotic in its design, and as she flipped through it, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. This is all part of a whispered. Our father was involved in something dark. Something that goes beyond inheritance, beyond the land. It's about something else entirely. Linda nodded slowly, her heart heavy with the truth. They had uncovered pieces of a puzzle, but now they were in deeper than ever before. They had no idea what their father had truly been involved in, but they knew they couldn't stop now. The truth was out there, and they had to find it. But with each step they took, the weight of the past grew heavier. The further they went, the closer they got to unlocking the dark forces that had been hidden for so long. And as they continued their search, one thing became clear: they were no longer just fighting for an inheritance. They were fighting for their lives. As Linda held the strange book in her hands, the air in the room seemed to grow thicker, colder. The pages felt heavier with each turn, as though they carried the weight of centuries. Daniel stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the book with a mixture of curiosity and dread. This can't be real," he murmured, more to himself than to Linda. What was Dad involved in? Linda could barely speak, her throat dry as she continued flipping through the book. The symbols on the pages were unlike anything she had ever seen, each one more intricate and unnerving than the last. The writing seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if it were waiting for them to decipher it. She turned the next page slowly, and her fingers froze as the words on the page seemed to shift. The ink glowed faintly, the symbols rearranging themselves before her eyes, forming an image, a diagram of the land they had inherited, the family estate, but with markings and circles drawn in places they had never seen before. "What is this?" Linda whispered. "This map, it looks like the estate, but why is it marked like this?" Daniel leaned in closer, his brow furrowed. "It's not just the estate. Look." He pointed to the symbols surrounding the map. Those symbols, they match the ones in the book. Whatever Dad was involved in, it has something to do with this land. Linda felt a chill run down her spine as she scanned the rest of the book. The further she went, the more twisted the contents became. There were detailed accounts of rituals, sacrifices, and cryptic references to a guardian spirit tied to the land. Each entry grew darker, filled with more warning signs about the price that must be paid for the inheritance. Suddenly, she stopped. The last entry on the page was a date she recognized. "Wait," Linda said, her voice shaking. "This date. It's the day Aunt Margaret died." Daniel's eyes widened. The day Aunt Margaret died. That was when the curse started, wasn't it? Linda nodded slowly, a feeling of dread washing over her. But according to this book, she wasn't just a victim of an accident. She was a sacrifice. She died so that the curse would continue. So that we would inherit this land. Daniel stepped back, his face pale. So, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't just fate. Dad, he chose Margaret to be the one. Linda closed the book with a snap, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "I don't know," she said, her voice tight. "But I know one thing for sure. We have to stop this. We can't let it keep going." Daniel's hand shook as he reached for the journal again, flipping through the pages until he found another entry. His eyes scanned the text quickly before he froze, his face draining of color. "There's more," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "There's a ritual, a final ritual. It says that the land will not truly belong to us until one of us makes the ultimate sacrifice." Linda's stomach dropped. "A sacrifice," she repeated, barely able to form the words. "Are you saying we have to give someone else up?" Daniel looked at her, his face full of dread. "I think that's what it's saying. To lift the curse, to truly claim the inheritance, one of us has to die." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Linda felt like the floor had dropped out from under her, the walls closing in around her. She wanted to scream, to deny it, but deep down, she knew the truth. Their father's legacy had been built on lies, on blood, and on the suffering of those they loved. And now, it seemed that the price they had to pay was far greater than they could have ever imagined. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Linda's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to process what they had just uncovered. She looked at Daniel, her mind racing, but he couldn't meet her eyes. He was lost in thought, staring at the book, the journal, the mirror. Everything around them that had once seemed so familiar now felt foreign, tainted by the dark secrets of their father's past. "We can't do this," Linda said finally, her voice trembling. "We can't let one of us die. There has to be another way." Daniel clenched his fists, frustration and fear flooding his features. I don't know, Linda. This book, it doesn't leave us with many options. It says the curse can only be broken if we follow through. If we don't, the land will never truly belong to us, and the consequences will be worse. Linda took a step back, her hands trembling. Worse? How could it get worse than this? We've already lost so much. First, Aunt Margaret, and now. Daniel suddenly grabbed her arm, pulling her toward him with surprising force. Listen to me, Linda. We have to think this through. This curse, whatever it is, isn't just about money or land. It's about something bigger. Something that ties us to our father's past. Linda looked at him, her eyes wide. What do you mean? I mean, Daniel said slowly, that there's something else in play here. Something our father might have never told us, but that we can't ignore. What if the land itself isn't just a piece of property? What if it's alive? What if the curse isn't just some superstition, but a real force that controls everything? Linda's breath caught in her throat. Alive, she repeated, her mind struggling to grasp the concept. You think the land is, what, cursed by a spirit? Daniel's grip on her arm tightened. I don't know. But the more we dig into this, the more I'm starting to believe it. Our father was involved in something powerful. And I think it's still here, still waiting to claim what it's owed. Linda pulled away, her mind spinning. No, this can't be happening. We have to stop it. Daniel. We can't let this go on. We have to find a way to break the curse without killing anyone. But Daniel's face hardened, a determined look in his eyes. We're out of options, Linda. If we don't make the sacrifice, the land will take it from us. Linda stared at him, a horrible realization dawning on her. The land was demanding its due, and it would stop at nothing to get it. She felt the weight of the choice before her, one she had never wanted to make. But now, the clock was ticking. The curse would not wait. Neither would the land. Linda's heart raced as she felt the walls of the room close in around her. The air felt thick with an unseen force, and the weight of Daniel's words hung heavy in the silence between them. She glanced at the book, still open on the desk, its pages mocking her with their cryptic warnings and promises. The land, the curse, it was all starting to feel too real, too dangerous. Daniel, Linda said, her voice shaky. There has to be another way. We can't just give in to this. There's something wrong here. We have to find a way to break the curse without anyone dying. Daniel shook his head slowly, his expression hardening. I don't know, Linda. Every time I try to think of another way, I keep coming back to the same thing. The curse, it's too strong. It's part of the land, part of what our father did. We have to pay the price, or it will consume us. Linda stepped away from him, her mind spinning. She couldn't accept this, couldn't believe that there was no way out. Her Aunt Margaret's death, the mysterious symbols, the talk of sacrifices, it all felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Yet, the cold reality was sinking in. There's one thing I don't understand, Linda said, turning to face Daniel again. If this curse is so powerful, why didn't Dad just let it consume him? Why didn't he make the sacrifice? Daniel looked at her, his eyes clouded with uncertainty. I've thought about that too. Maybe he was trying to protect us. Maybe he thought he could control it, or that one of us would take on the burden when the time came. But it's too late for him now, Linda. Whatever he tried to do, it didn't work. The curse is still here, and it's waiting. Linda felt a shiver run down her spine as Daniel's words settled in. She realized with growing dread that their father's actions, his decisions, had set in motion a chain of events they could no longer stop. The curse wasn't just about money or land, it was about something far darker, something ancient, tied to the earth itself. We need to go to the estate, Linda said suddenly, her voice firm despite the panic bubbling inside her. We need to see the land for ourselves. There has to be something there, something our father left behind that can help us. Daniel looked at her, his face a mask of doubt. You really think there's something at the estate? After everything we've uncovered? I don't know, Linda replied, her voice tight with determination. But we have to try. We can't just sit here and wait for the curse to take one of us. There has to be something we're missing, something we haven't seen. Without waiting for Daniel's response, Linda grabbed the book and stuffed it into her bag. She walked toward the door, her resolve hardening with every step. The estate, her father's legacy, was where everything had begun. It was where Margaret had died, where the curse had taken root, and it was where they needed to go to uncover the truth. Daniel hesitated, then followed her out of the room. "You're right," he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "We can't just sit around. But I have a bad feeling about this. Something tells me that going to the estate won't be as simple as we think." Linda nodded, understanding his fear. But there was no turning back now. They had uncovered too much, and the stakes were too high. She could feel the weight of her father's secret pressing down on her, and she knew they had no choice but to face it head-on. The drive to the estate was quiet, each sibling lost in their own thoughts. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the road as they neared the family home. The estate loomed ahead, its large, imposing gates appearing like a wall between them and the truth. Linda felt a knot tighten in her stomach as the gates slowly creaked open, revealing the sprawling grounds beyond. "We're here," Daniel said softly, his voice tinged with unease. Linda didn't respond. She couldn't. The weight of what lay ahead was suffocating, but she pushed forward, determined to face whatever came next. As they entered the house, the familiar scent of old wood and dust filled the air. The place seemed frozen in time, as if it had been waiting for them. The walls, once a source of comfort, now felt cold and distant. Linda couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the house itself was alive, aware of their presence. They made their way to the study, where their father had spent most of his time. The desk was still cluttered with papers, old letters, and books. But now, it all seemed meaningless, empty, like fragments of a life that had been consumed by something far darker. Linda's eyes fell on the large map of the estate, pinned to the wall. It was the same map they had seen in the book, with the strange symbols marking certain areas of the land. Her pulse quickened as she walked over to it, studying the markings carefully. "There's something here," Linda muttered, her finger tracing one of the symbols. "This one. It looks different from the others." Daniel stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" Linda studied the symbol, her mind racing. "It's like a mark, a place where the ritual is supposed to take place. I think this is where the sacrifice is supposed to happen." She turned to Daniel, her face pale. "We need to go there. Right now." Daniel hesitated, but Linda's determination left him with little choice. He nodded reluctantly. "Let's go. But we need to be careful. We don't know what we're walking into." Together, they walked out into the darkening evening, the air thick with tension. As they made their way to the marked location, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something much bigger than themselves, something that had been waiting for centuries. The ground beneath their feet seemed to hum with an ancient power as they reached the spot. There was nothing remarkable about the area. It was just a patch of land near the edge of the estate, surrounded by trees. But the air felt different here, charged with a strange energy. Linda knelt down, her fingers brushing the earth. She felt a sudden jolt of warmth shoot through her, like a current of electricity. The ground was alive, pulsing beneath her touch. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel stepped back, his face pale. "I don't know, but this isn't just land. This is something else. It feels alive," Linda finished, standing up slowly. "It feels like the land itself is waiting for something. For the sacrifice." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the trees around them. It was as if the entire estate was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Linda and Daniel exchanged a look. They had come too far to turn back now. The curse was real, and it had already claimed so much. But they still had one choice left. They just had to decide if they were willing to pay the price. Linda's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the quiet darkness of the estate. The wind swirled around them, carrying with it a faint, almost eerie whisper, as if the trees themselves were murmuring secrets. She could feel the weight of the land pressing down on her, pulling her deeper into its mysterious grip. "We can't turn back," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "We have to break the curse, no matter the cost." Daniel was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the land ahead. He wasn't sure if he believed in curses, but what he had witnessed so far was undeniable. The death of their Aunt Margaret, the strange symbols, the warnings, it all pointed to something dark and ancient, something that couldn't be ignored. "I don't know if we can break it," he said softly. "But I can't just let it consume us, either." Linda nodded, her resolve hardening. "We need to find out what our father did, what he was trying to protect us from. If there's a way to end this, we have to find it." With their minds made up, they turned and walked straight, the man guiding their steps. They passed familiar landmarks, the old fountain, the overgrown garden, the dilapidated barn, but it all felt different now, like a veil had been lifted and they could see the truth behind the surface. The estate, once a symbol of family pride, now felt like a place of danger, of something ancient that had been buried for too long. The house loomed behind them as they walked toward the edge of the property, where the marked symbol on the map had led them. The land was barren here, with only a few sparse trees standing tall against the horizon. The air grew colder, and Linda could see her breath mist in the air, despite it being a warm evening. "Look," Daniel whispered, pointing to a large, weathered stone at the center of the clearing. It had strange carvings etched into it, symbols that were almost identical to the ones they had seen in the book. Linda's stomach churned as she approached the stone, her heart racing with a sense of foreboding. She knelt beside it and ran her fingers over the carvings. They were cold to the touch, as if they had been etched into the stone centuries ago, and the patterns seemed to pulse beneath her fingertips. "This is it," Linda murmured. "This is the place where it all began." Suddenly, the ground beneath them rumbled, a low vibration that sent shivers down Linda's spine. Daniel stepped back, his eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" Linda stood up quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for Daniel's. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here." The rumbling grew louder, and then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, but something had changed. The air felt heavier, charged with an unsettling energy that made the hairs on the back of Linda's neck stand on end. "Did you hear that?" Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. Linda nodded, her eyes scanning the area around them. She had a feeling they weren't alone anymore. The estate, the land, it felt alive in a way she couldn't explain. Without warning, a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping out from behind the trees. Linda's breath caught in her throat as she saw the figure clearly. It was a man, tall and thin, his face hidden by a dark hood, but his presence was undeniable. He walked with a slow, deliberate pace, as though he were part of the land itself. "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, his voice shaky but determined. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he raised his hand, and for a moment, Linda thought she saw a flicker of light, a brief, glowing aura surrounding his fingers. Then, he spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "The curse is not what you think it is," the man said, his voice carrying a strange resonance that seemed to vibrate through the earth. "Your father was only part of the story. The land, this place, it is bound to something older, something much more powerful." Linda took a step back, her mind racing. "What do you mean? What is this place? Why is the land cursed?" The man lowered his hood, revealing his face. His skin was pale, almost ghostly, and his eyes, when they met Linda's, were dark and hollow, as if they had seen too much of the world's pain. "This land was never meant to be controlled," he said softly. "Your father made a mistake when he tried to claim it, when he tried to force it into submission. Now, it is hungry for more." Linda felt a chill run down her spine. "More? What do you mean by more?" The man's lips curled into a twisted smile. "The curse requires a balance, a price to be paid for the land's power. Your family has taken from it for years, but now it demands something in return. The sacrifice must be made, and only one can survive." Linda's pulse quickened as she realized the weight of his words. This wasn't just about money or inheritance anymore. The curse wasn't something they could break, it was something they had to feed, something that would continue to demand a price until the land had claimed what it was owed. Daniel stepped forward, his voice rising with anger. "We have to choose. That one of us has to die to satisfy this curse." The man's eyes flickered with a strange intensity. "That is the price for power. The land has taken much from your family already. Your father tried to bargain with it, but now the time for bargains is over. Only blood can satisfy it." Linda felt a wave of nausea hit her. She stumbled back, her mind whirling. This was far beyond what they had anticipated. Their father hadn't just been hiding a secret, he had been trying to protect them from something much more dangerous than they had ever imagined. But now, standing here in the dark, the weight of the land's curse pressing down on her, Linda knew there was no way out. They had to make a choice, and there was no escaping the consequences. The man turned slowly, as if sensing their indecision. "Time is running out," he said, his voice carrying an eerie calm. "The land demands its due. Who will pay the price?" Linda and Daniel stood frozen, staring at the man in the shadows. The future of their family, of their lives, hung in the balance. And as the wind began to howl once more, Linda realized that their next move would decide everything. Would they succumb to the curse, or would they find a way to break it before it was too late? The wind howled louder as the man's words lingered in the air, a cold, unsettling truth sinking into her. She felt the weight of the choice pressing on her chest like a heavy stone. Her mind raced, trying to process the impossible situation they were in. The man's cryptic message echoed in her ears. One must pay the price. But which one? Who would be the one to make the ultimate sacrifice? Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts. "We don't have to do this," he said, his hands clenched into fists. "We can fight back. There must be another way." The man gave a short, hollow laugh, and his eyes gleamed with something that sent a shiver down Linda's spine. "You think you can fight the land itself? This land has seen generations come and go. It has claimed what it is owed time and time again. You cannot escape it. Not now. Not ever." Linda's stomach twisted in fear. Was he right? Could they really fight something so ancient, so powerful? "Then tell us," Linda said, her voice steady despite the terror bubbling inside her. "How do we end it? How do we break this curse?" The man's expression softened, though his gaze remained cold. "You cannot break it. You can only bargain with it. But the price will always remain. There is no escaping the balance of nature, of life and death." Linda felt her heart sink. It was worse than she thought. The curse wasn't just a curse, it was the very fabric of the land, of everything their family had built here. It couldn't be undone, it could only be appeased. Suddenly, a realization hit Linda. "You're telling us that this curse is a living thing? That it has its own hunger?" The man nodded slowly, his face still hidden in shadow. "It is not a thing, but a force. It needs to be fed, and it feeds on blood. For every life it takes, it demands another to replace it. The curse will not rest until the balance is restored." Daniel stepped forward, his eyes flashing with defiance. "This is madness. We won't give in to it. We'll find a way to stop it." The man didn't respond at first. Instead, he seemed to consider Daniel's words, his eyes narrowing with cold calculation. "You will try, but you cannot win. The land is older than your father's bloodline. It is older than the soil beneath your feet. Your only option is to sacrifice someone, or the land will claim everything." Linda's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what he was saying. How could they make a choice like this? How could anyone choose who would live and who would die? Linda began, her voice shaking. "Who has to die? What if we refuse?" The man gave them a long, unreadable look, his face expressionless. "If you refuse, the curse will consume your family, each and every one of you. No one will escape." Linda's legs felt weak beneath her. She turned to Daniel, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and desperation. "We can't let that happen. We can't let it destroy us." Daniel met her gaze, his jaw clenched. He was torn. The idea of sacrificing someone to satisfy the curse felt wrong, unnatural. But the man's words carried a terrifying weight. Could they really risk everything just to hold onto their family? Or would they have to make the ultimate sacrifice? "Linda," Daniel said quietly, maybe we have to make a choice. Maybe it's not about winning. Maybe it's about surviving." Linda's heart ached as she looked at her brother. How could she live with the knowledge that one of them had to die? But the alternative was even worse, a slow, agonizing death for everyone. "We'll find another way," she said, trying to convince herself more than him. "We have to. There has to be a way." The man shook his head, a sad, knowing smile creeping onto his lips. "The land does not care for your hope. It cares for only one thing: balance." With those final words, he turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving Linda and Daniel standing in the cold, alone in the eerie silence. The wind had stopped howling, but the air felt thick with an oppressive weight. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. Linda felt a surge of determination. She wasn't going to let her family be torn apart. Not like this. She couldn't. But as she turned to face the estate, the familiar house now seeming cold and foreign, she realized something. The land was a part of them. Her father had tried to claim it, but perhaps he had only fed it, given it more power. Maybe that was the mistake. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden shout from Daniel. "Linda, look." She spun around in time to see a shadow dart across the clearing, moving fast, too fast to be human. It paused in the distance, just at the edge of the trees. Linda squinted, trying to make sense of the figure, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "What was that?" Daniel asked, his voice low, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," Linda replied, her voice tight with dread. "But I think it's time we leave. Now." They began to make their way back to the house, their steps quickening with each passing moment. The land felt like it was closing in on them, its hunger growing stronger with every step they took. As they reached the house, Linda turned for one last look at the clearing behind them. The stone, the carvings, it all seemed darker now, the symbols glowing faintly in the moonlight. She could almost hear the land whispering, calling to them, beckoning them to come back. But they didn't turn. They couldn't. Not now. Not until they found a way to end this madness. Back inside the house, they locked the doors and windows, the familiar creaks of the old house now a source of comfort. Linda sat in the living room, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts, trying to make sense of what had happened. She couldn't let this curse claim her family. She wouldn't. But she knew deep down that the land was not finished with them. It was just getting started. And soon, Linda realized, the hardest part of the curse would begin, the choice. Linda sat on the edge of the couch, her mind racing. The weight of the curse loomed over her, a dark cloud hanging in the air. She couldn't shake the feeling that the land was alive, watching them, waiting for them to make their next move. It was as if every corner of the house had become a prison, the walls closing in around her, and she couldn't escape the feeling that the decision they faced wasn't just inevitable, it was already upon them. Daniel paced back and forth, his face grim. He had always been the more practical one. But now, even he was struggling to hold onto his composure. "We need to talk to someone," he said, stopping abruptly in front of Linda. "There has to be someone who knows more about this. This can't be the end of it. We can't just give in." Linda looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "But who? Who knows about something like this? We don't even understand it ourselves." "Maybe we don't have to understand it completely," Daniel said, his voice hardening. "But there must be someone who knows how to fight this. Someone who can help us." Linda didn't respond. Her thoughts were too tangled, and the fear of what might happen next was suffocating. She had to admit, part of her wanted to just leave, to run far away from the land and the curse that held them in its grip. But she knew it wasn't that simple. They couldn't just run. The curse would follow them, hunting them down, claiming them one by one until it had taken everything. Daniel was right. They needed answers. And quickly. "I think I know someone," Linda said quietly, her mind flashing back to an old acquaintance. A woman named Clara, who had once been close to their family. Someone who had always been a little strange, but wise in ways that went beyond the ordinary. She had lived in the village for years and had spoken of old rituals and customs that no one else seemed to know. "You think Clara can help us?" Daniel asked, raising an eyebrow. He wasn't entirely convinced, but he knew they had no other options. "She knows more about the history of this place than anyone," Linda replied. "If anyone can give us answers, it's her." Daniel nodded, though his expression remained wary. "Then we'll go to her. But we have to be careful. We don't know who else might be watching us, or what else might be lurking out there." They didn't waste another moment. The night had grown colder, and the house seemed even darker, more oppressive than before. Linda grabbed her jacket, and they both slipped out through the back door, careful to avoid making too much noise. The night air hit them like a slap, sending a chill down Linda's spine. The sky was clouded over, and the moon, once so bright, was now obscured by a thick layer of darkness. They made their way through the overgrown yard, the once familiar path now feeling like a labyrinth. Every step seemed to echo in the silence, and every rustle of leaves felt like a warning. The woods surrounding the estate were thick, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, as if the trees themselves were reaching for them. As they reached the edge of the property, the air seemed to change. The oppressive atmosphere around the house had followed them, and now it felt as though the entire estate was a low, vibrating hum. Linda could almost feel the land's anger, its hunger, as if it were daring them to defy it. The village wasn't far, but every minute felt like an eternity. They moved quickly, keeping their eyes peeled for any signs of movement in the darkness. The last thing they needed was for the man they had encountered in the clearing to reappear. But they saw no rustling of branches in the wind, the distant calls of night animals, and the oppressive silence that clung to everything. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached Clara's small, weathered cottage on the edge of the village. It was tucked away among thick trees, hidden from the main road. The light inside was dim, but it was enough to see by. Linda knocked on the door, her heart pounding in her chest. A few moments passed, and then the door creaked open, revealing Clara standing in the doorway. She was older than Linda remembered, her once dark hair now streaked with grey, but her eyes were just as sharp and knowing as ever. She studied Linda and Daniel for a long moment before speaking. "You've come," Clara said softly, her voice tinged with a knowing sadness. "I've been expecting you." Linda's stomach turned, but she didn't have time to question how Clara knew they were coming. "Clara, we need your help. It's the estate. The curse." "I know," Clara interrupted, her voice steady, as though she had been expecting this moment for years. "I've seen the signs." "Then you know what we're dealing with," Daniel said urgently. "We don't know what to do. The man, the one in the shadows, he told us one of us has to die to satisfy the curse. Is that true?" Clara's expression darkened. "Yes, but there is more to it than just blood." Linda frowned. "What do you mean?" Clara stepped aside and motioned for them to enter. Once inside, she led them to a small wooden table covered with old, worn books and faded maps. She lit a candle, the flame flickering in the dim light, casting long shadows on the walls. "The curse isn't just a matter of life and death," Clara said, her voice lowering to a whisper. "It's about power. The land has always demanded sacrifices, but not just any sacrifice. It needs the blood of someone who carries the family's legacy, someone who holds the key to its future." Linda felt a chill creep up her spine. "What does that mean?" Clara's eyes met Linda's, and for a moment, Linda saw something in them that she hadn't before: fear. "It means the land is not finished with your family. It has been waiting for the right person, the right bloodline. And now, it has chosen." Linda's heart skipped a beat. "Chosen? Who?" Clara's gaze shifted to the window, as if something outside was watching them. "You must make a choice. One of you will have to die. But the one who survives will carry the curse with them, always. There will be no peace, no escape." Linda and Daniel stood frozen, the weight of Clara's words pressing down on them like a vice. They had thought they could find a way out, but now, it seemed as though the land had already claimed its price. And there was no going back. The room seemed to close in around Linda as Clara's words settled in. Her mind spun, trying to understand what the old woman had just said. The land, the curse, the bloodline, it all sounded like something out of a nightmare. But this wasn't a nightmare. This was their reality, and it was more terrifying than anything Linda had ever imagined. What do we do now?" Daniel's voice was thick with disbelief, but his desperation was clear. "Clara, you must know something. A way to break this." Clara sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping as though the weight of the years had settled on her all at once. She looked tired, worn down by something older than age, something that seemed to haunt her. "There is no breaking it," she said softly. "The land doesn't let go once it has claimed its due. But it can be bargained with. There's always a way, but the price." Linda felt a lump rise in her throat. "The price is too high," she whispered, shaking her head. She looked at Daniel, her eyes pleading. We can't sacrifice someone. We don't have a choice," Clara said flatly. "The land demands balance, and if you try to fight it or run from it, it will destroy everything. Your family, your home. The land will take all of you." Linda couldn't breathe. The weight of Clara's words crushed her. How had they gotten to this point? How had their lives turned into a game of life and death? She glanced around the small, dimly lit room, looking for anything that might offer an answer, but there was nothing, only the flickering candlelight and the sound of her own heart pounding in her ears. "Isn't there another way?" Daniel insisted, his voice rising. "We can't just give up. There has to be something." Clara's eyes softened with a hint of sorrow. "I wish there was," she murmured, her voice tinged with regret. "But the curse for generations. It family, taking until it is satisfied. The land is patient, but it doesn't forget." Linda felt a cold sweat on the back of her neck. Her thoughts swirled. Was there no escape? Was there no way to protect the one she loved? The old woman's voice brought her back to the moment. "There is one thing you can try, a ritual that could delay the curse. It won't end it, but it might give you some time. Time to make a choice, to make peace with what must happen." Linda's heart skipped. A ritual? What kind of ritual? Clara reached over to one of the old books on the table and opened it, her fingers tracing the faded text. "It's a blood ritual," she said reluctantly. "It requires a willing participant. Someone who will offer their life to the land in exchange for peace for the others. It is not a complete solution, but it can buy you time. Time to figure out what you want to do." Daniel looked at Linda, his expression unreadable. "Would you do it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Linda's heart twisted painfully. She had always known that, in the end, it might come down to this, one life for many. But the thought of giving herself up, of sacrificing her life, felt impossible. She had her own dreams, her own future. She wanted to live, to grow old, to see the world beyond the walls of this house. But could she live with herself knowing that everyone she loved would be consumed by the curse if she didn't? I don't know," Linda admitted, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can do that. If I can give myself up." Clara's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on Linda's arm, her grip surprisingly firm for someone so frail. "You don't have to decide now. But you must know that the curse won't wait forever. You will feel its pull, and it will get stronger with every passing day. There is no time to waste." Linda turned to Daniel, searching his face for some kind of answer, but all she saw was the same fear mirrored in her own eyes. He was struggling with the same impossible choice. "I'll help you," Daniel said quietly, his voice tight. "I'll help you figure this out, Linda. We'll get through this together." Tears welled up in Linda's eyes, and she wiped them away quickly. She couldn't afford to break down now. Not when the land was still waiting, watching. "What do we need to do for the ritual?" Linda asked, her voice steady, though her insides were trembling. Clara hesitated before answering. "You must make an offering. The ritual requires the blood of one who is willing to give up their life to the land. But the ritual will not just buy you time, it will mark you, change you. You will carry the burden of the curse, even if you manage to survive. You will be bound to the land." Linda's stomach twisted at the thought of being forever tied to this cursed land lived. But as Clara had said, there were no easy choices. Only survival. "I'll do it," Daniel said suddenly, his voice firm. Linda turned to him, stunned. "No," she said quickly. "You don't have to." "I will," Daniel interrupted. "I won't let you carry this burden alone. You're my sister. I'll do it for you." Linda shook her head, her heart breaking. "No, Daniel. I'm not going to let you sacrifice yourself for me." "Maybe it's not about sacrifice anymore," he said softly, meeting her eyes with a look of determination. "Maybe it's about surviving. If I do this, if I make the offering, you'll have a chance to break free. To find a way to end this once and for all. But I can't do that if I'm trapped here, waiting for the curse to catch up with us." Linda swallowed hard, her chest tight with emotion. She wanted to stop him, wanted to save him from the pain, but deep down, she knew he was right. The curse had chosen, and someone had to make the offering. If it was Daniel who could do it, then she would have to accept it. "All right," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We'll do the ritual. But we'll make sure it's not in vain. We will find a way to end this curse, Daniel. I promise you." Clara nodded gravely. The ritual must be performed before dawn. There is little time. With that, Linda and Daniel set their resolve, preparing for what was to come. The night felt colder now, as if the land itself was watching, waiting for them to make their move. The choice had been made, but the cost of that choice would haunt them forever. As the night stretched on, the urgency of their task weighed heavily on Linda and Daniel. They had no time to waste, but neither of them could shake the feeling of dread that gripped their hearts. Clara had made it clear, they were dealing with forces beyond their control, ancient and unforgiving. There was no turning back now. "Are you sure about this?" Linda asked again, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound strong. She could barely meet Daniel's eyes, her mind racing with doubt and fear. Daniel nodded firmly, though the uncertainty in his gaze was evident. "We don't have a choice, Linda. We've come too far. If we don't do this, it'll all be over for us. For everyone." Linda clenched her fists at her sides. "I know, but it doesn't feel right, Daniel. It feels like we're walking straight into a trap. What if the curse? What if it changes us forever?" Clara, who had been silently preparing the ritual tools, glanced up. "The land will change you," she said quietly. "But remember, it's not about who you are when the ritual begins. It's about what you're willing to give. Your blood, your soul, your very life. The land will take it, and it will demand its price. But it can also grant you peace. For a while." The words felt like a heavy weight on Linda's chest. Peace. Was that all they were buying? Time. Was that really enough to justify this madness? She wanted to scream, to run away, but she couldn't. She couldn't leave Daniel to face this alone. "Let's do it," Daniel said, his voice unyielding. "We're doing this together." Linda looked at him, her brother, who had always been the stronger one, the one who carried the weight of their family when their father had died. He had always been the protector. And now, it seemed, he was willing to sacrifice himself for her, for them all. The love and courage in his eyes broke her heart. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm with you, Daniel. We'll do this together." Clara stood up and motioned for them to follow her. She led them to the back of the house, where the moonlight barely pierced through the thick trees surrounding the property. The air was thick with tension, and Linda could feel the land, alive, watching, waiting. The old woman spread out a cloth on the ground, the fabric old and worn but still strong. The center of the cloth had symbols etched into it, strange markings that seemed to pulse with an energy Linda couldn't quite understand. "Sit," Clara instructed, gesturing for them both to kneel beside the cloth. Linda hesitated for a moment but then joined Daniel, her heart racing in her chest. Clara began to chant softly, her words a low murmur that seemed to reverberate through the earth beneath them. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sense of anticipation that made Linda's skin crawl. Every breath felt like it might be her last. As the chanting grew louder, Clara reached for a small knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight. It was simple, but there was something undeniably sinister about it. Linda's breath caught in her throat. "Wait, what are you?" Clara held up a hand to silence her. "It must be done, Linda. The blood must be spilled willingly, and the offering must be pure. We cannot falter." With trembling hands, Daniel took the knife from Clara. Linda wanted to scream, to stop him, but she knew it was too late. The curse had already taken hold of their lives. It would not be denied. Without another word, Daniel placed the knife to his palm and sliced deeply. The blood flowed in thick, crimson rivers, felt her stomach turn as the scent of iron filled the air, mingling with the heavy atmosphere of the night. Clara continued chanting, her voice growing louder and more urgent, as if she could feel the land stirring beneath them. Linda couldn't look away from Daniel, his face set in determination despite the blood now pooling at his feet. The ground beneath them seemed to vibrate, a low, unsettling hum that vibrated through Linda's bones. She glanced at Clara, who was now speaking faster, her eyes wide with concentration. Suddenly, the air seemed to crackle, the energy in the night growing thick and oppressive. Linda's heart hammered in her chest. She could feel it, something shifting, something ancient, something terrible. "Now," Clara commanded, her voice no longer just an old woman's croak but something far more powerful, far more terrifying. "Give your soul." Linda's breath caught. "My soul," she whispered. "What does that mean?" Clara looked at her, eyes burning with a strange intensity. "It means you must offer a piece of yourself. Not just your blood, but your spirit. Only then will the land accept the bargain. Linda recoiled, shaking her head. I can't do that. Then the curse will claim you, Clara said coldly. And it will take everything you love. Linda's mind raced, her heart pounding in her ears. She didn't want to do this, didn't want to give up a part of herself, but she realized, with sickening clarity, that there was no way out. Not anymore. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes and placed her hand over the blood-stained cloth. The symbols on it seemed to pulse with a strange life of their own, drawing her in. It felt as though the land itself was calling to her, whispering promises of peace if she would just give in. Her fingers trembled as she pricked her finger with the blade, drawing a drop of blood. The moment it touched the cloth, the earth beneath them seemed to tremble in response. Linda gasped as a sudden rush of cold filled her body, as if the very essence of the land was now inside her, claiming her, marking her. The air grew thick with an oppressive presence. Linda felt dizzy, light-headed, as if she were losing control of her own mind. But through the fog of fear and confusion, one thing was clear: the curse was far from over. It had only just begun. Linda's body felt as though it was being pulled in two directions at once. The chill that had washed over her now seemed to burrow deep into her bones, seeping into her very soul. The land had marked her, and she could feel it, the weight of centuries pressing down on her, the ancient presence now wrapped around her like a suffocating fog. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she gasped for breath, but it was as though the air had thickened, making each inhale feel impossible. Linda, Daniel's voice cut through the haze, but it sounded distant, muffled, as though he was speaking from underwater. Are you okay? What's happening to you? She tried to speak, to tell him that she didn't know, but the words got caught in her throat. Instead, all that came out was a strangled gasp, her hands trembling as they pressed into the cloth beneath them. The symbols on the fabric seemed to dance, twisting and shifting in ways that defied reason, their glowing lines blurring in and out of focus. Clara, still chanting in a language that seemed older than time itself, stepped closer, her eyes narrowed with concentration. It's working, she muttered, as if to herself. The land has accepted the offering. But the price? You will feel it soon enough. Linda's vision blurred as her body trembled violently. She could feel something deep inside her, something dark and heavy, like a shadow taking shape within her mind. It was the curse. It was alive, and it was feeding on her. But at the same time, she could feel something else. A strange, twisted connection to the land beneath her feet. It was as though the earth itself was reaching into her, connecting with her very essence, sharing its secrets, its history. Linda! Daniel shouted, his voice now frantic. He was kneeling beside her, gripping her arms, but she could hardly feel him. It was as though the distance between them had grown impossible to cross. With every passing second, Linda's sense of self began to slip away. Her thoughts became jumbled, overlapping, like a puzzle whose pieces no longer fit. The land, no, the curse, was in her, clawing its way through her consciousness. And yet, at the same time, she could feel it, the power. The ancient strength of the earth flowing through her veins, filling the emptiness that had always been there. Clara! Daniel cried, desperation in his voice. She's not herself anymore. What is happening to her? Clara looked down at Linda with something like sorrow in her eyes. She's beginning to understand, Clara said softly. The curse is not just a curse, it's a bond. A union with the land itself. It will change her, shape her, and she will never be the same again. Linda felt her breath catch in her throat as the earth's power surged through her. It was too much, too overwhelming. The darkness that had once seemed distant was now a part of her, merging with her soul, and she could feel herself slipping away. She wanted to fight it, to run from it, but she couldn't. The land was inside her now. Her hands clenched into fists as the pain intensified. It felt as if her body was being torn apart from the inside out. But there was no escape. She felt something strange begin to stir within her, an ancient force awakening, and she realized, with a deep sense of terror, that she could feel the very heartbeat of the land. This is it. Clara's voice cut through the storm of her thoughts, harsh and unyielding. You have begun the process. The curse has already taken root. There is no going back. But you must understand something. There is still time. There is still a chance for redemption. But you must make a choice before the dawn. Redemption. Linda's voice barely made it past her lips, raw and hoarse. Her head swam, and her body felt like it was being shredded apart by unseen forces. How? Clara knelt beside her, her ancient hands resting on Linda's shaking shoulders. The curse will seek to consume you. But if you can find the strength to reject its hold, it will to break free. But it is not easy. The land will tempt you, seduce you. It will make promises of power, of control, of peace. But those promises are lies. The land only takes. Linda's eyes fluttered, and she tried to focus on Clara's words. Her vision was fading, her limbs weak, but the weight of what Clara said hung in the air like a warning. The land would seduce her, make her believe that it was the answer, that it could grant her peace if she gave in. But at what cost? I won't let it win, Linda whispered through gritted teeth, though she wasn't sure if she truly meant it. The pull of the land was so strong now, like a magnetic force drawing her in. Her body felt like it was made of clay, molding to the land's will. But as the first rays of light began to pierce the dark sky, a sense of urgency gripped Linda. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let the land consume her entirely. She wasn't sure how, but she knew she had to fight back, even if it meant sacrificing everything else. Daniel, she gasped, turning her head toward him. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. He was holding her tightly, unwilling to let go, but Linda knew that if she didn't do something, it would all be lost. You have to listen to me, she said, her voice weak but filled with determination. You have to get me out of here, Daniel. You have to get me away from this place. Daniel hesitated, fear and confusion clouding his features. What are you talking about, Linda? We can't leave. We've made the offering. It's too late. You're changing. I can see it. I know, Linda gasped, the words choking her. But it's not too late. Not if we act now. We need to find the source. The land, it's not just the land, Daniel. It's the bloodline. The source of the curse is buried here, somewhere. We have to find it, before it finds us. Daniel's eyes locked with hers, understanding dawning slowly. You're right. We need to end this. For good. With one last look at Clara, who only nodded grimly, Linda and Daniel stood together, their resolve set. The curse had claimed part of Linda's soul, but she wasn't ready to let it take her entirely. Not yet. The battle for their lives, and their souls, was far from over.